On our anniversary yacht party, he raised his glass to freedom from my gold digger. His parents cheered. Guests laughed. I smiled, stood up in my dress and said, "Enjoy the view while you can." By sunset, his smile was gone, and so was everything he took for granted. The phone rang at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, and I knew before I answered that my world was about to shatter. "He's gone," Emma whispered through the speaker, her voice so broken I barely recognized it. "Everything's gone." I sat up in my cramped studio apartment, cold sweat already beading on my forehead. My sister Emma, brilliant, unstoppable Emma, hadn't called me crying since we were kids. She was the one who fixed things, who had answers, who made plans that actually worked. "What do you mean gone?" I asked, though part of me already knew. "Brandon. He took everything. The house, the business accounts, even Lily's college fund. The lawyers are saying I signed papers, but I never." Her voice cracked completely. "I can't even afford to fight this. Before we continue, I want to thank you for joining me in sharing stories of justice and resilience. If you believe that financial abusers should be held accountable, please consider subscribing. It's free and helps us reach more victims who need to hear this. Now let's see how this revenge unfolds." I was 21 the day I watched my sister lose everything, and I'll never forget the sound she made when she tried to explain how it happened. It wasn't crying. It was the sound of someone's spirit breaking in real time. Emma had always been the smart one in our family. While I was struggling through community college, she was building a successful marketing consultancy from scratch. She had ambition that burned bright enough to light up entire rooms. She had plans mapped out 5 years ahead, color-coded spreadsheets for everything, and a fierce heart that never backed down from a challenge. After her messy divorce from Lily's father, she'd wanted a fresh start. A chance to build something beautiful for herself and her 8-year-old daughter. That's when Brandon Shaw walked into her life at a networking event in downtown Chicago, wearing an expensive suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent and carrying himself with the kind of confidence that made people lean in when he spoke. "He seemed different," Emma told me later during one of our late-night phone calls when she was still hopeful. "Not like the other guys who just want to impress you with their cars or their jobs. He actually listened. Asked about Lily, about my business dreams. He said he wanted to invest in me, not just financially but emotionally." Brandon Shaw had that disarming smile, the kind that made people forget to ask the important questions. He spoke fluent charm, peppered his conversations with just enough vulnerability to seem genuine, and had a way of making every woman feel like she was the only person in the room who truly understood him. Within 3 months, he'd moved in with Emma and Lily. Within 4, he was handling Emma's business finances, to take the stress off her shoulders. By month 5, he was making decisions about investments, property, and Lily's private school tuition. 6 months later, she was broke. The foreclosure notice came on a Thursday. Emma called me sobbing, holding the papers in her shaking hands while Lily sat at the kitchen table doing homework, completely unaware that her world was crumbling around her. "I don't understand," Emma kept repeating. "The business was profitable. We had savings. How is this possible?" But Brandon was gone. Vanished like smoke, leaving behind only empty promises and a trail of legal documents that somehow made Emma responsible for debts she never knew existed. The house they'd bought together? Turns out the mortgage was entirely in her name, but the deed had been quietly transferred to one of his shell companies. Her business accounts? Drained through a series of investments she supposedly authorized but had no memory of signing. Her home was foreclosed within 30 days. Lily went to live with her father in Seattle, a man who'd barely shown interest in his daughter until suddenly having custody became a weapon he could use against Emma. And Emma? She was hollowed out, a ghost of the fierce woman who used to tackle problems head-on. He tried to fight back. God, she tried. But Brandon came at her with lawyers who charged $800 an hour, NDAs that threatened to destroy her professionally if she spoke publicly about their relationship, and legal firepower she couldn't begin to afford. Every time she found a new attorney willing to take her case, somehow they'd withdraw within weeks, citing conflicts of interest or scheduling issues. Our parents tried to help, but they were already stretched thin caring for our grandmother. Our younger brother was still in school. I was working 2 jobs just to cover my own basic expenses. We watched Emma shrink week by week, watched her disappear into herself as the legal battles drained what little fight she had left. That's when I watched myself change. I didn't cry, though everything inside me screamed too. I didn't scream, though rage burned through my veins like acid. Instead, I made a promise, one that would reshape the next 9 years of my life. I promised I would be the one to ruin Brandon Shaw. Not with fists or fury, but with proof. With truth. With the same methodical precision he'd used to destroy my sister. I started small, researching everything I could find about financial fraud, investment scams, and the psychology of confidence men. I studied branding and marketing, learning how to craft an image, how to become someone else entirely. I took courses in digital forensics, accounting, and business law. I changed my name legally from Sarah Mitchell to Mia Carson. I got a completely different haircut, learned to modulate my voice differently, adopted new mannerisms and speech patterns. I built myself into the woman Brandon Shaw would never suspect. Someone sophisticated enough to move in his circles, smart enough to understand his games, but seemingly naive enough to become his next target. It took me 9 years to become Mia Carson, financial consultant and trusted advisor to high-net-worth individuals. 9 years of reinventing myself, of studying his patterns, of tracking his movements through business journals and social media posts. By 30 I was ready. And in Miami at an exclusive charity gala I saw him again. Brandon Shaw, the man who had stolen my sister's life, was standing by the bar telling some elaborate story to a group of admirers, his laugh carrying across the room like nothing had ever happened. He didn't recognize me when I approached. Of course he didn't. He saw what he always saw when he looked at women. A potential mark, a mirror to reflect his own magnificence, a fan waiting to be dazzled. When he smiled that same disarming smile and asked if we'd met before, I smiled back and said the words that would begin his downfall. "Not yet," I said. "But I have a feeling we're going to know each other very well." And just like that it began. Brandon's ego was his weakness and I became his drug. "You're different from other women," he told me on our third date, swirling his wine like he was conducting an orchestra. "Most of them just want to talk about themselves. You actually listen." I tilted my head slightly, letting my eyes widen with what I hoped looked like genuine fascination. "I find successful people so interesting. How do you read the market so well when everyone else seems to miss the obvious patterns?" His chest puffed out visibly. "It's about understanding human psychology. People are predictable when you know which buttons to push." I laughed at his explanation, not too loudly, just enough to stroke his ego. "That's brilliant. I never would have thought of it that way." Within 6 weeks he was calling me every morning and texting throughout the day. I responded with careful enthusiasm, asking questions that made him feel like a mentor, a genius, a man worth studying. I became his favorite audience of one. "Move in with me," he said after our 8th week together, presenting it like a generous gift rather than a request. "That apartment of yours is beneath you. You deserve better." His penthouse overlooked Biscayne Bay, all glass and steel and expensive art that screamed money without saying taste. I walked through it for the first time, mentally cataloging every corner, every potential hiding spot, every angle where I could place what I needed. "This is incredible," I breathed, running my fingers along the marble countertop. "You've built something amazing here." He showed me everything with the pride of a collector displaying his treasures. His office with its dual monitors and walls covered in framed deals. His filing system organized with military precision. His safe, which he opened to show me stacks of cash and important documents, never imagining I was memorizing the combination as his fingers moved across the keypad. "I like transparency in relationships," he said, completely oblivious to the irony. "No secrets between us." What he didn't know was that the delicate gold necklace I wore every day, a gift I'd supposedly inherited from my grandmother, held a recording device smaller than a button. State-of-the-art technology that picked up conversations from 20 feet away and transmitted everything to a secure server I'd set up under a false identity. Installing the cameras took 3 weeks. Motion-triggered devices no bigger than shirt buttons hidden in plain sight. One went behind the decorative air vent in his study, positioned to capture his desk and computer screen. Another nestled under the soft light of his bookshelf, angled toward his chair where he took his most private calls. The third was built into a pen holder I'd given him as a moving-in together gift. "You're so thoughtful," he'd said, placing it prominently on his desk. "Most women just buy flowers or something useless." The real work began once I had access to his daily routine. Brandon conducted his shadiest business from home, believing his penthouse was his fortress. He'd pace around his office, talking to clients on speakerphone, never knowing every word was being recorded. "These people are idiots," he said one afternoon, hanging up on a sobbing woman who'd just lost her retirement savings. She signed the papers. Not my problem, she didn't read them. I was in the kitchen, preparing his afternoon espresso exactly how he liked it. Strong, no sugar, served in the Italian cup he'd bought during a business trip to Milan. My hands didn't shake as I listened to him mock someone whose life he'd just destroyed. "Everything okay, darling?" I called out sweetly. "Just dealing with another client who can't handle reality," he replied. "Some people deserve to lose their money." I walked into his office carrying the coffee, my smile perfectly calibrated. "You work so hard to help people. It must be frustrating when they don't appreciate your expertise." He took the cup from my hands, his fingers brushing mine. "This is why I love you. You understand the business world isn't a fairy tale." Clara, his assistant, became an unexpected ally in my intelligence gathering. She was a genuinely sweet woman in her 50s, with pictures of her grandchildren covering her desk and a tendency to overshare when she felt comfortable with someone. "I've been bringing her coffee every Tuesday," I told Brandon one evening. "She seems lonely since her husband passed." "Good," he said, not looking up from his tablet. "Keep her happy. She knows where all the bodies are buried." I started showing up at his office with lattes for Clara, asking about her kids, remembering details about her life that made her light up with gratitude. She began confiding in me about work stress, about clients who called screaming, about the strange hours Brandon kept and the mysterious meetings that weren't on his official calendar. "He's lucky to have you," she told me one afternoon, adjusting her reading glasses. "Most of his girlfriends never lasted more than a few months. You're the first one who seems to actually care about his work." The investors' wives were harder to crack, but I played the role of the admiring new girlfriend perfectly. At cocktail parties and charity events, I asked questions about their husband's success, complimented their jewelry, remembered their children's names. They began including me in group chats and lunch invitations, treating me like Brandon's latest accessory while sharing gossip about business deals and family drama. Even Marcus, Brandon's IT consultant, began trusting me after I helped him troubleshoot his daughter's college application essays. He started explaining the security systems to me, proud to show off his technical knowledge to someone who asked intelligent questions. "Your boyfriend's really paranoid about data security," Marcus told me one day while updating Brandon's firewall. "He's got encryption layers that would make the government jealous." "He's just careful," I replied, handing him a bottle of water. "Smart people protect their assets." Nobody noticed I was always listening, always watching, always filing away every detail for later use. The breakthrough came 4 months into our relationship. Brandon had been drinking wine after a particularly successful day, relaxed and talkative in a way that made him careless. "You know what I love about you?" he said, pulling me closer on the couch. "You're not judgmental. Most women get all moral about business." I curled against his side, playing with the buttons on his shirt. "I think people are too naive about money. Sometimes you have to be creative to get ahead." "Exactly." He sat up straighter, animated by finding someone who seemed to understand his worldview. "Like this one time, I borrowed money from my college roommate's dad for a business investment. Never paid it back, obviously. The old man was loaded anyway." I laughed softly, like he'd shared a charming anecdote. "That's resourceful. I actually did something similar once. Borrowed money from a friend and never paid it back. I felt bad about it, but..." "Don't feel bad," he said, his eyes lighting up with approval. "Good girl. That's how you win. Morals are for losers who stay poor." That night, I lay awake next to him, recording his steady breathing, knowing I'd just captured something priceless. Not just his words, but his philosophy. His complete lack of conscience laid bare in a moment of wine-fueled honesty. 6 months later, he proposed to me on a yacht in the Bahamas sunset, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson behind him. The ring was enormous. A blood diamond, though he'd never admit it, and he presented it like he was offering me the crown jewels. "Marry me," he said, dropping to one knee on the deck. "Let's make this official." I said yes, and I cried. Real tears streaming down my cheeks as he slipped the ring onto my finger. He thought I was crying because I was happy, because I was overwhelmed by his grand gesture and the promise of a luxurious future together. But I was crying because I knew that marriage would give me access to his passwords, his accounts, his deepest secrets. I was crying because after all these months of careful planning, I was finally close enough to destroy him. Back home, I waited until Brandon fell asleep before walking to my laptop. I opened my encrypted email and composed a message to Gerald, my private investigator. The subject line was simple: update. The message was even simpler: we're engaged. His response came within minutes: excellent. Phase 2 begins now. The wedding was small, intimate, exactly how Brandon wanted it. Just his parents, a few business associates, and the minimal legal witnesses required. I'd suggested inviting my family, but he dismissed the idea with a wave of his hand. Keep it classy, he said. Your people wouldn't understand the lifestyle we're building. The marriage certificate was barely dry when everything shifted. Suddenly, I had legal access to accounts I'd only glimpsed before. Joint credit cards arrived in the mail with my new name embossed in gold letters. He added me to his business insurance policies and listed me as an emergency contact on forms I'd never seen. Welcome to the big leagues, Mrs. Shaw, he said, handing me a black American Express card. Now you can finally dress the part. But with access came surveillance. Not from the outside, from him. Marriage wasn't partnership in Brandon's world. It was ownership. The Hermes looks better on you than the Coach, he said one morning, critically examining my outfit choice. We're meeting the Hendersons for brunch. Image matters. I nodded, changing into the bag he preferred, but my fingers found the tiny recording device sewn into its lining. Every conversation, every cruel comment, every casual cruelty was being captured and transmitted to servers he'd never find. The new cameras were easier to install now that I lived there permanently. One went into the master bedroom, hidden inside the decorative lamp I'd bought for our anniversary. Another was built into the frame of our wedding photo. Ironic considering what it would eventually capture. The third was the most audacious. Embedded in his laptop charger, recording everything that appeared on his screen. His cloud storage was the real treasure trove. Using the passwords I'd memorized during our engagement, I synced his entire digital life to a remote server under an identity that didn't exist on paper. Years of fraud downloaded in organized folders. Client communications, forged documents, bank transfers, shell company records. The breadth of it was staggering. You're getting better at this technology stuff, Brandon commented one evening watching me work on my laptop. Maybe I should put you in charge of our digital security. Just trying to keep up with my brilliant husband, I replied, closing the screen that showed me copying his files to my encrypted drives. But marriage also revealed the depths of his cruelty in ways I hadn't experienced before. Brandon didn't just want admiration, he wanted complete control. Text me when you get to lunch with your college friend, he said one Tuesday morning. And when you leave. I like knowing where my wife is. Of course, I agreed, though my friend didn't exist. Instead, I spent those hours in a coffee shop, transcribing recordings and cross-referencing victim names with police reports. He started critiquing everything. My hair, my weight, my choice of books, even how I laughed at his jokes. That laugh sounds forced, he'd say. Relax. Be natural. The comments about my family were the hardest to bear. Your sister really screwed up her life, didn't she? He said casually over dinner one night. Good thing you learned from her mistakes. I nodded, cutting my steak with surgical precision. She was always too trusting. Exactly. Trust is expensive. Most people can't afford it. Every insult, every manipulation, every casual destruction of my self-worth went into the journal I kept hidden under a loose floorboard in our walk-in closet. The hardwood had warped slightly from an old water leak, creating the perfect hiding spot for a leather-bound notebook that detailed his psychological warfare. Day 47 of marriage. Called my cooking pedestrian in front of his business partner. Made me remake dinner while they watched. Day 63. Told me I'd gained weight. Said successful men need wives who maintain their value. Day 89. Prevented me from calling my parents on my birthday. Said my family was energy drains who didn't deserve my time. The breakthrough came during our trip to Aspen. Brandon had closed a particularly large deal involving a tech startup and several pension funds. The celebration dinner stretched late into the night, with expensive wine flowing freely and his guard completely down. You know what's funny about this business? He said, swirling his glass of Dom Perignon. People always think they're smarter than you. They think they can outsmart the system. But you're always one step ahead, I encouraged, refilling his glass. He laughed, loud and harsh. Some woman tried to ruin me once. Your sister, actually. Emma something. Cost me a lot of time and money with her lawyers and media nonsense. My blood turned to ice, but I kept my expression neutral. What happened? I buried her, he said with satisfaction. Destroyed her reputation, her finances, took her kid away. She thought she could fight me? Please. I've been doing this since college. She was just another casualty. He kept talking, detailing exactly how he'd manipulated the legal system, bribed officials and systematically destroyed Emma's life. Every word was being recorded by 3 different devices, but I needed him to keep going. She deserved it, I said softly. People who cross you learn the hard way. Exactly. He slammed his hand on the table, making the silverware jump. Loyalty is everything. Betrayal gets punished. That's how you build an empire. That night, after Brandon passed out on the California king bed, I sat in the bathroom with my laptop, encrypting the recordings 3 different ways. I made copies on separate drives, uploaded duplicates to secure servers in different countries, and created a physical backup that I sealed in a waterproof container. The next morning, I drove to a private bank in downtown Denver and opened a safety deposit box under Mia Carson's name. Inside went the encrypted drive containing Brandon's confession about Emma, along with documentation of every crime he'd committed in my presence. Back home, I established contact with Gerald properly for the first time. He was a retired forensic accountant whose son David had been one of Brandon's earliest victims. A young entrepreneur who'd lost his software company and his family's savings to Brandon's Ponzi scheme 7 years earlier. David jumped off the Coronado Bridge. Gerald told me during our first face-to-face meeting at a diner outside San Diego. Left behind a wife and twin babies. Brandon Shaw killed my son as surely as if he'd pushed him himself. Together, we built what we called the Shaw File, a comprehensive timeline of Brandon's criminal activity spanning 15 years. Gerald's accounting expertise combined with my insider access created an unbreakable case. We traced money through dozens of shell companies, connected victim testimonies with financial records, and documented patterns of fraud that spanned multiple states. This is enough to put him away for life, Gerald said one afternoon, reviewing our latest findings. But we need the perfect moment. One chance to make sure he can't wiggle out. The plan crystallized during our 4th year of marriage. It would happen on our 5th wedding anniversary on a yacht, just like where our fake relationship had truly begun with his proposal. The symbolism felt appropriate, ending where it started but with the roles completely reversed. He'll be surrounded by the people who enabled him, I explained to Gerald. His parents, his business partners, the investors who looked the other way. They all need to see him fall. Gerald nodded, studying the guest list I'd prepared. And the federal agents? Already confirmed. They'll be posing as potential investors. Brandon loves showing off to new money. Only this time, instead of putting a ring on my finger, he'd be getting handcuffs. Instead of promising me a future, he'd be facing 25 to life. The Shaw File was complete. 5 years of marriage, 9 years of preparation, and a lifetime of rage were about to converge into one perfect moment of justice. Brandon Shaw had buried my sister, but he'd made one fatal mistake. He taught me how to bury him back. The weeks leading up to our 5th anniversary required the performance of my life. Every detail had to be perfect, every element calculated to create the exact scenario I needed. Brandon expected grandeur for milestone celebrations, and I was more than happy to give him a party he'd never forget. I want to invite the Hendersons, the Carmichaels, and definitely Roger from the Manhattan deal, Brandon said, reviewing my guest list over morning coffee. This needs to feel exclusive. Important people only. Of course, I agreed, adding checkmarks next to names that included 4 federal agents posing as hedge fund managers from a fictitious firm called Meridian Capital. Agent Sarah Chin would be Sandra Chong, Agent Mike Rodriguez would be Miguel Reyes, and their backup team would blend seamlessly into the crowd of legitimate investors Brandon loved to impress. The yacht rental was Brandon's idea, naturally. We got engaged on a yacht, he said. It's poetic. Full circle. Shows how far we've come. I spent days coordinating with the yacht company, ensuring every camera angle would be perfect for what was coming. The Serenity was a 150-foot vessel with multiple decks, plenty of space for guests to mingle, And most importantly, nowhere for Brandon to run when the moment arrived. The orchids should match my dress, I told the florist, selecting white and gold arrangements that would complement the elegant cream silk gown I'd chosen for the occasion. Everything should feel romantic but sophisticated. Even the catering required precise coordination. I needed the service staff positioned correctly, the timeline of dinner and drinks mapped to the minute, and most crucially, I needed to ensure the boat would be in international waters at exactly the right moment for legal jurisdiction purposes. 3 days before the party, Brandon's parents flew in from Connecticut. Richard and Margaret Shaw were old money wrapped in new cruelty, the kind of people who spoke in coded language about the right sort of people and maintaining standards. They'd raised Brandon to believe the world owed him everything simply for existing. "Mia, darling," Margaret said during their welcome dinner, her voice dripping with the condescension she reserved for people she considered beneath her family's status. "You've done so well planning this celebration. Brandon always said you had potential." "Thank you, Mrs. Shaw," I replied, playing the grateful daughter-in-law while mentally cataloging every dismissive comment for my final recording session. Richard was worse, treating our anniversary party like a business networking opportunity. "Make sure you seat me next to those Meridian Capital fellows," he instructed. "I've been looking for new investment partners since the Thompson deal fell through." The irony was delicious. Brandon's own father was eager to meet the agents who would be arresting his son. The night before the party, Brandon's mask slipped completely. I'd seen him cruel before, but never with such pure venom as when he paced around his study, scotch in hand, reviewing the financial statements from his latest victims. "These people are so pathetically stupid," he snarled into his phone, speaking to his lawyer about a class action lawsuit they were fighting. "Mrs. Peterson is crying about losing her house? She should have read the fine print. Not my problem, she trusted the wrong person." I stood in the hallway outside his office, my recording device capturing every word as he detailed exactly how he'd manipulated elderly clients into signing over their retirement savings. "The beauty is they can't prove intent," he continued, laughing as he described forging signatures and backdating documents. "By the time they realize what happened, the money's in the Cayman accounts and they're talking to lawyers who can't do anything about it." He took another drink, his voice becoming more animated with alcohol and arrogance. "You know what I love most? When they call crying, begging me to give their money back. Like I'm running a charity instead of a business. Idiots deserve what they get." My hands trembled as I held the device, but not from fear. From rage. From the knowledge that in less than 24 hours, he'd be the one crying and begging. The morning of the party, I flew Emma and Lily into Miami. They'd been living in Seattle for 3 years, where Emma had slowly rebuilt her life working as a freelance graphic designer. The legal battles had aged her, carved lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before, but she was surviving. "Are you sure about this?" Emma asked as we met in her hotel lobby. "What if something goes wrong?" "Nothing will go wrong," I assured her, though my heart raced watching her hug Lily. My niece had grown so much. Now 11 years old, with Emma's same determined eyes but a wariness that broke my heart. 3 years of limited visitation had stolen so much time from them. "I can't promise justice," I told Emma as Lily explored the hotel's lobby fountain. "But I can promise he won't ruin anyone else. After tonight, Brandon Shaw's business will be finished forever." Emma nodded, tears threatening to spill. I never thought anyone would believe me." "I always believed you," I said. "Everything I've done, everything I became, it was all for you. For Lily. For everyone he destroyed." That afternoon, I supervised every detail of the yacht preparation. The federal agents arrived early, slipping seamlessly into their roles as wealthy investors. Agent Chin wore a stunning black cocktail dress and carried herself with the casual confidence of someone accustomed to million-dollar deals. Agent Rodriguez sported an expensive watch and spoke knowledgeably about market trends and hedge fund strategies. "Everything's in position," Agent Chin murmured as she passed me near the bar setup. "We'll be ready when you give the signal." Brandon emerged from the master cabin wearing his most expensive tuxedo, the one he'd bought in London specifically for events where he wanted to project ultimate success. He surveyed the yacht with satisfaction, completely unaware that it would be his last moment of freedom. "Perfect," he declared, adjusting his cufflinks. This is exactly how I wanted to celebrate 5 years of marriage to the best investment I ever made. Even his compliments were financial transactions. Even his love was calculated in terms of profit and loss. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the Miami skyline in shades of gold and amber, guests arrived via tender boats that ferried them from the marina. The laughter and conversation created the perfect soundtrack for what Brandon believed was his triumph. He moved through the crowd like a king holding court, regaling investors with stories of his latest deals, accepting congratulations on our anniversary, completely oblivious to the fact that 4 federal agents were documenting every incriminating statement he made. "Ladies and gentlemen," Brandon called out as the yacht reached international waters, the timing perfect for maximum legal impact. The sunset glowed behind him like a spotlight on a stage, casting everything in dramatic relief. He raised his champagne glass, his smile wide and confident. "Thank you all for joining us to celebrate 5 incredible years of marriage. 5 years with my beautiful, devoted wife." He paused for effect, his eyes finding mine across the deck. "To freedom from my gold digger." The laughter erupted around us. His parents raised their glasses. Business associates chuckled appreciatively. Even some of the investors smiled, thinking it was just Brandon's typical crude humor. But I saw the venom in his eyes, the cruel satisfaction of a man who believed he'd successfully used and controlled another person. He thought he was celebrating his victory over me, his successful manipulation of yet another victim. I smiled, stood slowly, set down my untouched champagne. "Enjoy the view while you can, darling." The yacht's engines cut suddenly, leaving only the sound of waves against the hull and the confused murmur of guests wondering why we'd stopped moving. 4 men in black tactical gear stepped out from below deck. Agent Chin nodded at me. This was it. I reached into my purse and withdrew a hard drive labeled in my careful handwriting, "Confessions." Sorted by month. Brandon's face transformed from confusion to dawning horror as I handed the drive to Agent Rodriguez. "What is this?" Brandon whispered, his champagne glass slipping from nerveless fingers to shatter on the deck. I leaned in close enough to smell his expensive cologne one last time, close enough to see the exact moment his world collapsed. I kissed his cheek gently like a loving wife saying goodbye. "Your reckoning," I whispered. The split second after I whispered "your reckoning," Brandon's survival instincts kicked in. His eyes darted frantically across the deck, calculating escape routes like a cornered animal. The transformation was instantaneous, from confident predator to desperate prey. He lunged toward the starboard side of the yacht, shoving past his own mother in his panic. Margaret Shaw stumbled backward, her champagne glass flying from her manicured hands to crash against the deck railing. "Brandon!" she shrieked, more outraged by his rudeness than understanding the gravity of the situation. He didn't get far. Agent Rodriguez moved with the fluid precision of someone trained for exactly this scenario. 3 powerful strides brought him within arm's reach of Brandon, who was frantically trying to climb over the yacht's safety railing. "Federal agents, you're under arrest," Rodriguez shouted, his voice cutting through the ocean breeze and confused chatter. Brandon's expensive Italian leather shoes slipped on the polished railing. He crashed back onto the deck, his tuxedo jacket tearing as he hit the ground hard enough to knock the wind from his lungs. The guests erupted in chaos. Mrs. Henderson, the oil executive's wife, let out a piercing scream that seemed to unlock everyone's voices at once. Roger Carmichael dropped his wine glass, the red liquid spreading across the white deck like spilled blood. Someone's phone clattered to the ground as they fumbled to record what was happening. "Is this real?" whispered Dr. Patricia Morse, the pharmaceutical heiress, her face pale as she clutched her pearl necklace. "This has to be some kind of mistake." Agent Chin moved to secure the perimeter while her colleagues surrounded Brandon. She flashed her badge to the stunned crowd, her voice clear and authoritative. "FBI Financial Crimes Division. Everyone please remain calm and stay where you are." Brandon scrambled to his feet, his perfectly styled hair disheveled, his bow tie hanging loose around his neck. Wild-eyed, he spun toward his father. "Dad, call Morrison. Call the lawyers. This is insane." Richard Shaw stood frozen, his face cycling through confusion, embarrassment, and dawning horror as the implications hit him. His son, his legacy, his pride, handcuffed on a yacht full of their most important social connections. You have the right to remain silent, Agent Rodriguez began, pulling Brandon's arms behind his back with practiced efficiency. The metallic click of handcuffs echoed across the deck with finality. I stood perfectly still, my untouched champagne still in my hand, watching 5 years of careful planning reach its crescendo. The weight of this moment, the vindication, the justice, the end of Brandon's reign of terror, settled over me like a blanket. This was supposed to be our life. Brandon shouted, his voice cracking with desperation and disbelief. His eyes found mine across the deck, filled with a rage so pure it might have frightened me once. I walked toward him slowly, my heels clicking against the yacht's deck with measured precision. The crowd parted instinctively, creating a path between us. When I reached him, I looked directly into his eyes. The same eyes that had charmed my sister, that had seduced countless victims, that had looked at me with fake love for 5 years. No, darling, I said, my voice calm as still water. This was your sentence. His face contorted with fury and betrayal. You planned this. You lying, manipulative. Everything I learned from you, I interrupted quietly. The only difference is I had a good reason. Agent Rodriguez guided Brandon toward the yacht's main deck where a Coast Guard vessel was already approaching for transport. As they moved past the crowd of guests, Brandon's parents finally snapped into action. This is a mistake, Margaret Shaw declared, her voice shrill with panic. Our family has connections. You can't just... Ma'am, we have 5 years of recorded evidence, Agent Chin said firmly. Your son has been under federal investigation for financial fraud, elder abuse and racketeering. This is not a mistake. The yacht's engines roared back to life as we began the return journey to shore. The party atmosphere had completely evaporated, replaced by hushed conversations and nervous phone calls. Several guests were already trying to distance themselves, claiming they barely knew Brandon, or had always suspected something wasn't right. As Miami's coastline grew larger, I could see the media circus waiting at the marina. News vans lined the parking lot, their satellite dishes reaching toward the sky like mechanical flowers. Reporters with cameras and microphones crowded the dock barriers, having caught wind of the arrest through police scanners. The yacht bumped gently against the dock pilings, and immediately the camera flashes began. A strobe light show that turned the evening into day. Questions flew through the air like bullets. Mrs. Shaw, did you know about your husband's crimes? How long has the FBI been investigating? What was your role in the arrest? I stepped off the yacht without acknowledging any of them, my eyes scanning the crowd until I found what I was looking for. Emma stood near the marina's edge, partially hidden behind a concrete pillar. Lily was beside her, now 12 years old, with Emma's same determined chin but wearing a sundress instead of the business attire I remembered from their old life. My niece's hand was firmly clasped in her mother's, their reunion finally uninterrupted by court orders and supervised visitation schedules. Brandon saw them too as the agents led him past the crowd. His step faltered, and for the first time since his arrest, his defiance cracked completely. His face broke, not with anger, but with something that might have been recognition of what he'd destroyed. Emma didn't speak. She didn't move. She simply watched him with the steady gaze of someone who had survived his worst and lived to see justice served. Lily didn't even look at him. Her attention was fixed on a small hermit crab scuttling across the dock, completely uninterested in the man who had torn her family apart years ago. That indifference, that complete dismissal of his existence, seemed to hurt Brandon more than handcuffs or cameras or criminal charges. He opened his mouth as if to say something to them, but Agent Rodriguez kept him moving toward the waiting federal transport vehicle. Mrs. Shaw. Another reporter thrust a microphone toward me. What's your response to these charges? I walked past them all, my focus solely on reaching Emma and Lily. The questions faded into background noise as I approached my family. Within 48 hours, Brandon's face was on every major news channel. Millionaire conman arrested at anniversary party, read the headlines. His business accounts were frozen pending investigation. Previous victims, emboldened by news of his arrest, began coming forward with their own stories of financial abuse. Lawsuits that had been settled under dubious circumstances were suddenly reopened by prosecutors armed with new evidence. The empire of lies he'd built over 15 years crumbled in less than a week. I didn't watch the news coverage. I didn't read the articles analyzing his crimes or speculating about his sentence. Instead, I sat in Emma's hotel room while she and Lily planned their new life together, and I poured us tea from the ceramic set she'd managed to save from the foreclosure years ago. "It's really over," Emma said quietly, watching Lily color in a coloring book on the hotel room floor. "It's really over," I confirmed. "The monster was caged. The victims had their voices back. And my sister had her daughter." 3 weeks after Brandon's arrest, the phone calls started. Publishers, television producers, documentary filmmakers. Everyone wanted to own a piece of my story. They offered contracts with numbers that made my eyes water, speaking fees that could set me up for life, and the kind of fame that turns ordinary people into household names. "This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity," insisted Amanda Richfield from Pinnacle Publishing, her voice crackling through my phone as she outlined a multi-book deal. "Your story has everything: romance, betrayal, justice. We're talking New York Times bestseller potential." I sat in my temporary apartment, surrounded by boxes of evidence I no longer needed, and listened to her paint pictures of book tours and television interviews. The woman who had spent 5 years pretending to be someone else was being offered the chance to become famous for finally being herself. "I appreciate the offer," I said, cutting her off mid-pitch. "But I'm not interested." The silence stretched for several seconds. "I'm sorry, did you say no? To a 7-figure advance?" I said no to all of it. Gerald found my decision baffling when I met him at our usual diner the next morning. He'd been fielding his own media requests, producers eager to interview the retired accountant who'd helped bring down Brandon Shaw. "You could help people by telling your story publicly," he argued, stirring sugar into his coffee with more force than necessary. "Think of all the women who could learn from what you did." "I can help them more effectively without cameras," I replied. "This wasn't about attention, Gerald. It was for Emma. It was for David. It was for every person Brandon destroyed who couldn't fight back." He nodded slowly, understanding flickering in his weathered eyes. "You're right. Some victories are too important to turn into entertainment." The legal aftermath moved with surprising speed. Emma's case was reopened with fresh evidence, and the judge who'd originally ruled against her made no attempt to hide his disgust when the Shaw file landed on his desk. Brandon's financial manipulations were laid bare in black and white, impossible to dismiss or explain away. "Visitation rights are hereby fully restored," Judge Martinez declared during the hearing I attended via video link. "Furthermore, this court finds that the original custody arrangement was based on fraudulent evidence and deliberate manipulation of the legal system." I watched Emma's face through the screen as she heard those words. 3 years of supervised visits, of fighting for every phone call, of explaining to Lily why Mommy could only see her on weekends. All of it officially acknowledged as the injustice it had always been. The reunion happened at Meridian Hill Park in Seattle on a crisp Saturday morning. I drove Emma there, parking across the street where I could see but not intrude. Through my windshield, I watched Lily run toward her mother with the unguarded joy of a child who'd been given back something precious she'd thought was lost forever. Emma dropped to her knees on the grass, catching Lily in a hug that seemed to heal something broken in both of them. They held each other for long minutes, Emma's shoulders shaking with tears she'd held back for 3 years. I stayed in the car, my own tears flowing freely for the first time since this whole journey began. The woman I'd become, Mia Carson, Brandon's wife, the perfect liar, finally cracked open to reveal the sister who'd never stopped fighting for her family. That afternoon, I drove to the offices of Justice Partners, a legal nonprofit that specialized in financial abuse cases. I carried with me a carefully organized digital archive. Every template, every investigation technique, every piece of methodology that Gerald and I had developed over 5 years. "We want to make this available to other investigators," I explained to Director Sarah Kim as she reviewed the materials on her laptop. "Everything that worked, everything that didn't, all the lessons learned." Her eyes widened as she scrolled through the documentation. "This is incredibly comprehensive. The timeline tracking system alone could help dozens of cases. We're calling it the Shaw Project," I said. "His name should live on as a warning. As proof that predators can be stopped if someone's willing to do the work." Within 6 months, Justice Partners had used our methods to crack 2 similar cases. Other nonprofits requested access to the templates. Law enforcement agencies began incorporating our digital forensics techniques into their training programs. Brandon Shaw's legacy wasn't the empire of wealth he'd tried to build. It was the system designed to stop people exactly like him. I used the settlement money from my divorce. Brandon's frozen assets were eventually distributed to his victims, with Emma receiving a substantial portion, to open my own practice. Not a grand office building or a flashy storefront, just a quiet suite in a professional complex where women could come to plan their escapes from financial abuse. Financial Recovery Consulting, read the simple sign on my door. Confidential. Judgment-free. Results-focused. My first client was Maria Santos, whose husband had been slowly draining their joint accounts while convincing her she was bad with money. My second was elderly Mrs. Chin, whose adult son had stolen her Social Security benefits and convinced her it was her fault for not understanding modern banking. I didn't advertise or seek publicity. Words spread organically through social workers, divorce attorneys, and women's shelters. They came to me broken and scared, convinced they were powerless against systems designed to protect abusers. I taught them how to document everything, how to secure their evidence, how to build cases that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. I gave them the tools to reclaim their lives the way I'd reclaimed Emma's. 6 months after opening my practice, Emma moved back to Miami with Lily. They rented a small house near the beach, close enough for regular dinners but far enough to give them space to rebuild their relationship without the weight of my crusade hanging over them. One morning, we walked together along South Beach while Lily collected seashells and chased sandpipers through the foam. The sunrise painted everything in shades of gold and pink, and for the first time in almost a decade, I felt truly peaceful. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the delicate gold necklace I'd worn every day for 5 years. The one that had recorded Brandon's confessions, captured his cruelty, documented his downfall. Its hidden microphone had been my constant companion through the darkest period of my life. Without ceremony, I walked to the water's edge and threw it as far as I could into the Atlantic. It disappeared beneath the waves with barely a splash. That chapter's closed, I said, watching the ocean erase the last physical reminder of who I'd had to become. Emma slipped her hand into mine. Thank you for getting me back, my daughter. Thank you for giving me a reason to become someone worth being. Lily ran up to us, her small hands full of perfect shells and sea glass worn smooth by years of patient waves. Look what I found. And for once, looking forward felt better than looking back. The woman who had been Mia Carson was gone. The sister who had watched Emma lose everything was healing. I was finally just myself again. And that was enough. If this story of calculated revenge had you holding your breath, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when she whispered, "Your reckoning," and handed over that hard drive on the yacht. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more jaw-dropping stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.
I'm Stephanie, 25 years old, and still feeling the ache in my chest where my brother Kyle broke my ribs during what should have been a simple family dinner. The physical pain was excruciating, but nothing compared to hearing my parents tell me to stay quiet about it. They cared more about protecting Kyle's reputation than my broken bones. But my doctor, a woman I'd never met before that day, refused to be complicit in their cover-up. Her decision changed everything. Before I dive into this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments, and if you've ever stood up against family injustice, hit that subscribe button. You're not alone. Growing up in Oak Ridge, Michigan wasn't exactly the picture-perfect childhood you'd see on television commercials. Our town had just under 15,000 residents, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business, and appearances mattered more than almost anything else. This became the foundation of my family's values, though I wouldn't realize it until much later. My family consisted of 4 people: myself, my older brother Kyle, and our parents Thomas and Natalie Harris. From the outside, we looked like the ideal American family. My father built a successful real estate development company from scratch, and my mother was heavily involved in local charity organizations and social clubs. We lived in a sprawling colonial house in the most prestigious neighborhood in town. We attended church on Sundays, went on family vacations twice a year, and our Christmas cards were professional photo shoots that my mother spent weeks planning. But inside our home, the reality was very different, particularly when it came to my brother Kyle. Kyle is 3 years older than me, now 28, and from my earliest memories, he had what my parents called a bit of a temper. This bit of a temper meant that when we were children, he would frequently destroy my toys when he was angry. I had a collection of porcelain dolls my grandmother had given me, and Kyle broke 3 of them during various outbursts. Each time, my parents bought me a replacement and told me to understand that your brother has strong emotions. As we got older, Kyle's aggression evolved from breaking my possessions to breaking my spirit. He would call me names, tell me I was stupid, or criticize my appearance. When I would complain to my parents, they would shake their heads and dismiss it as siblings being siblings. My mother would pat my hand and say, "That's just how brothers and sisters interact, Stephanie. You need to develop thicker skin." Throughout our childhood, it became increasingly clear that Kyle was the favorite. When I brought home straight A's, my accomplishment would be acknowledged with a simple, "good job," but when Kyle managed to pull a B- in a class he was failing, my parents would take us all out to celebrate at the nicest restaurant in town. When I was accepted to the University of Michigan with a partial scholarship, my parents nodded approvingly. When Kyle got into Michigan State after my father made a sizable donation to their business school, they threw him a party and invited the entire neighborhood. Despite all this, I worked hard to be the perfect daughter. I chose to pursue medicine, even though what I really loved was art. My watercolor paintings were actually quite good according to my high school art teacher, who encouraged me to apply to art schools. But my father scoffed at the idea, calling it an expensive hobby, not a career. So, I put away my paintbrushes and picked up textbooks instead. Our family's standing in the community was paramount to my parents. My father's business relied heavily on his reputation and connections. He was on the board of the local chamber of commerce, sponsored Little League teams, and made sure his name appeared regularly in the local newspaper for his charitable contributions. My mother was the president of the Garden Club and organized the annual charity gala that raised money for the Children's Hospital. We weren't just residents of Oak Ridge, we were pillars of the community. The pressure to maintain this image was constant and suffocating. If I ever complained about Kyle or expressed any negative emotions, my mother would quickly remind me, "We don't air our dirty laundry in public, Stephanie. People look up to the Harris family." My father was more direct. "Your brother will take over the business someday. Nothing can tarnish his reputation." My feelings toward my family were a complex tangle of love, resentment, duty, and longing for approval. I loved them because they were my family, but as I grew older, I began to recognize the toxicity of our dynamic. Still, years of conditioning made it difficult to trust my own perceptions. Whenever I felt mistreated, a voice in my head that sounded suspiciously like my mother would whisper that I was being too sensitive or selfish. After completing my medical degree, I did my residency in Chicago, which gave me 2 blessed years away from Oak Ridge and my family. The distance provided clarity, and with the help of a therapist I started seeing, though I told my parents it was just a stress management counselor. I began to understand that my family's behavior wasn't normal or healthy. But then my residency ended, and an opportunity came up to join a medical practice back in Oak Ridge. Despite my misgivings, I took it. The rational part of my decision was financial. The position offered loan forgiveness for my considerable medical school debt. But emotionally, I was still seeking my family's approval and harboring hope that our relationship could improve. When I moved back 3 months ago, there were early warning signs that nothing had changed. At my welcome home dinner, Kyle monopolized the conversation with stories about his recent promotion at our father's company. When I tried to share an interesting case from my residency, my mother cut me off to ask if I'd met any suitable young men in Chicago. I noticed these red flags but chose to ignore them, telling myself that things would be different now that I was an adult with a career of my own. I was wrong. So very wrong. The evening that changed everything was supposed to be a celebration of Kyle's promotion to Vice President of Operations at our father's company. My mother had spent days preparing, cooking Kyle's favorite foods and decorating the dining room with congratulatory banners. I arrived early to help set the table and prepare the salad, hoping that contributing would help me feel more included in the family festivities. I'd picked up a bottle of Kyle's favorite whiskey as a gift, even though I was stretching my budget thin that month with the costs of settling into my new apartment. I wanted this evening to go well. I wanted to believe we could be a normal, loving family now that we were all adults. The evening started pleasantly enough. My father opened an expensive bottle of wine, and my mother served her famous beef Wellington. Kyle seemed to be in good spirits, accepting compliments about his new role with his characteristic confidence that bordered on arrogance. He was already on his second glass of whiskey by the time we sat down to dinner, but that wasn't unusual for him. To Kyle, my father toasted, raising his glass, following in my footsteps and exceeding even my expectations. Harris Development will be in good hands with you at the helm someday. We all clinked glasses, and I offered my own congratulations. The company's lucky to have you, Kyle. Your clients at the Riverside Project seem really happy with your work. Kyle nodded appreciatively. Damn right they are. I turned that project around after Jackson nearly tanked it. The conversation flowed smoothly through the main course. My mother asked about my new position at the medical practice, though her interest seemed perfunctory. Kyle was already on his third whiskey when he started talking about his girlfriend Megan, whom he'd been dating for about 6 months. We're talking about moving in together, he announced. Her lease is up next month, and it doesn't make sense to renew when she spends most nights at my place anyway. That's wonderful, dear, my mother said, though I noticed a slight tightening around her eyes. She'd always been traditional about couples living together before marriage. Megan's great, I said, genuinely meaning it. I'd met her a few times and found her intelligent and kind. She mentioned last time I saw her that she's hoping you'll come to her family's lake house this summer. Kyle's expression darkened slightly. When did you talk to Megan? We ran into each other at the grocery store last week, I explained. We chatted for a few minutes. She's really nice. What else did she say? Kyle's tone had an edge to it now. I shrugged, not understanding his sudden shift in mood. Nothing much. She mentioned something about your dad's fishing boat needing repairs before you visit. She should keep her mouth shut about my family, Kyle snapped, cutting me off. The table fell silent. My mother looked down at her plate, while my father cleared his throat uncomfortably. Kyle, I said carefully, she didn't say anything bad. She was just making conversation. Last month she had the nerve to say our family is intense after Sunday dinner, Kyle said, his voice rising. Like her family is so perfect with her alcoholic uncle and shoplifting sister. I'm sure she didn't mean anything by it, my mother interjected, clearly trying to defuse the situation. But Kyle wasn't listening. The alcohol had lowered his inhibitions, and he was fixating on perceived criticism. And now she's talking about us to you behind my back? It wasn't like that at all, I protested. It was just friendly conversation. Right, Kyle scoffed. Always so perfect, aren't you, Stephanie? The doctor. The good daughter. Everyone's favorite. I almost laughed at the irony of him calling me the favorite, but I knew better than to point out the obvious. Kyle, I think you're misunderstanding. Don't tell me what I understand. He slammed his glass down, sloshing whiskey onto the white tablecloth. My mother flinched but said nothing. My father finally spoke up. Son, let's dial it back. This is supposed to be a celebration. Kyle stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. I need some air. He stormed out of the dining room toward the kitchen. After an uncomfortable silence, my mother suggested we move to dessert. I offered to help clear the plates, using it as an excuse to check on Kyle and hopefully smooth things over. I found him in the kitchen, pouring another generous helping of whiskey. Kyle, I'm sorry if I upset you, I said quietly, placing the stack of dinner plates on the counter. That wasn't my intention. He turned to face me, his eyes bloodshot. You always do this, acting all innocent while stirring up trouble. That's not fair, I protested. I was just making conversation about Megan. I like her. Well, keep your nose out of my relationship, he snapped. And stop trying to buddy up to my girlfriend to get dirt on me. That's not what happened at all, I said, my own frustration rising now. Why would I do that? Because you've always been jealous of me, he said, taking a step closer. Dad's company, Mom's attention, everything. You can't stand that I'm successful while you're still paying off student loans. His words stung because they were so opposite to reality. It was such a complete inversion of our family dynamic that I couldn't help but laugh in disbelief. Are you serious right now? That laugh was the match to gasoline. Kyle's face contorted with rage. Don't you dare laugh at me. Before I could react, he shoved me hard. I stumbled backward, the small of my back hitting the sharp corner of the granite kitchen island. The impact knocked the wind out of me, and I felt a sickening crack in my ribcage. Pain exploded through my torso as I crumpled to the floor, gasping for breath. The commotion brought my parents running into the kitchen. My mother screamed when she saw me on the floor. My father froze in the doorway. What happened? My mother demanded, looking between Kyle and me. She fell, Kyle said immediately. She tripped. I couldn't speak through the pain, could barely breathe. Each attempt to inhale sent jagged shards of agony through my chest. My mother knelt beside me. Stephanie, can you get up, honey? My father finally moved, pulling Kyle away. What did you do? I heard him hiss. Nothing. She's faking it, Kyle insisted, though the slight tremor in his voice betrayed that even he knew that wasn't true. With my mother's help, I managed to sit up, though the movement made me cry out in pain. He pushed me. I finally gasped. I hit the counter. My mother's expression flickered between concern and something else, calculation. I'm sure it was an accident, she said soothingly. Kyle wouldn't deliberately hurt you. But he had. And it wasn't the first time, just the most serious. I think I need to go to the hospital, I managed to say between shallow breaths. It hurts to breathe. Let's not overreact, my father said, stepping forward.
Take some ibuprofen and rest.
If it's still bad tomorrow, we can reassess. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I'm a doctor. I know what broken ribs feel like. I need to go now. I'll drive you, my mother offered. I can drive myself, I said, not wanting to spend another minute in that house. Despite the excruciating pain, I needed to get away from them all. My father helped me to my feet, his face a mask of concern that didn't reach his eyes. These family disagreements happen, he said quietly. Let's not make more of this than it is. I didn't respond, focusing instead on breathing shallowly to minimize the pain. I gathered my purse and keys, refusing further assistance. As I carefully made my way to the door, I heard my father talking to Kyle in harsh whispers. The drive home was agonizing. Every bump in the road sent spasms of pain through my chest. I should have gone straight to the emergency room, but shock and denial pushed me to go home instead. I told myself I'd take some strong painkillers from my personal medical kit and see how I felt in the morning. Part of me still couldn't process what had happened, not just Kyle's violence, but my parents' reaction to it. That night was one of the longest of my life. I couldn't lie down without excruciating pain, so I spent it propped up in a recliner, drifting in and out of uneasy sleep. By morning, the pain had not subsided, and my side was now sporting an angry purple bruise. I could barely move without gasping in pain. I knew then that I couldn't ignore this. I needed medical attention, regardless of what my family wanted. The next morning brought not just physical pain, but the emotional assault of my family's reaction. My phone started ringing at 7:30 a.m., my mother's ringtone. I let it go to voicemail, not ready to speak with her yet. 10 minutes later, she called again. This time, I answered. Stephanie, how are you feeling this morning? Her voice was light, casual, as if she were asking about a mild headache rather than potentially broken ribs. Not good, I replied honestly. I'm in a lot of pain. I can barely move. These things always feel worse the next day, she said dismissively. Take some Advil and put ice on it. Listen about last night. Mom, I think my ribs are broken, I interrupted. Kyle seriously hurt me. There was a pause on the other end of the line. When she spoke again, her voice had taken on that placating tone she used when she thought I was being difficult. Sweetheart, it was an unfortunate incident, but let's not blow it out of proportion. Kyle feels terrible about it. Has he said that? Has he called to apologize? I asked, already knowing the answer. He will, I'm sure. He was very upset last night after you left. But right now, we need to focus on moving past this. Your father, and I think it's best if we just put this behind us. I shifted in my chair, wincing at the stab of pain. Mom, I can't breathe without it hurting. This isn't something I can just put behind me. It's probably just bruised, she insisted. If Kyle had really hurt you that badly, you would have gone to the hospital last night. The gaslighting was so blatant, it would have been laughable if it weren't so infuriating. I'm going to get it checked out today, I told her firmly. Stephanie, her voice took on a warning tone, I think it's best if we keep this within the family. There's no need to involve outsiders in what was clearly just a momentary loss of temper. Outsiders? Mom, I'm talking about seeing a doctor for a medical injury. You know what I mean, she said impatiently. Questions will be asked. Forms will need to be filled out. Things get put on record. Are you seriously asking me not to seek medical attention because it might reflect badly on Kyle? I couldn't keep the incredulity from my voice. I'm asking you to think about the consequences, she replied. Your father's business depends on our reputation in this community. Kyle is positioned to take over eventually. A misunderstanding like this could have lasting repercussions. A misunderstanding? I echoed. He shoved me into a counter and broke my ribs. That's not a misunderstanding, that's assault. Don't use that word, she hissed. Your brother would never assault you. He had too much to drink and there was an accident. These things happen in families, Stephanie. Before I could respond, I heard my father's voice in the background asking for the phone. After a moment of muffled conversation, he came on the line. Stephanie, he said, his business voice in full effect. How are you feeling? Like Kyle broke my ribs, I replied bluntly. He sighed heavily. Your mother tells me you're thinking of going to the doctor. I think that's premature. Give it a day or two to see if it improves. Dad, I am a doctor. I know what broken ribs feel like. Then you also know there's not much they can do for ribs anyway, he countered. They'll just tell you to rest and take pain medication, which you can do at home. He wasn't entirely wrong, but that wasn't the point. I need an X-ray to make sure there's no displacement that could puncture a lung. And if you go in, what exactly are you planning to tell them about how this happened? His tone made it clear this was the real issue. The truth, I said simply. There was a long pause. Stephanie, I want you to think very carefully about what you're doing. Kyle has worked incredibly hard to get where he is. His future at the company, his reputation in the community, these aren't things to jeopardize over a momentary lapse in judgment. So his future matters. But my broken ribs don't. Don't twist my words, he said sharply. Of course I care about your health. But there are broader considerations here. Kyle made a mistake, yes, but he doesn't deserve to have his life ruined over it. The conversation continued in this vein for another 10 minutes. My father alternated between minimizing my injury and emphasizing the potential consequences for Kyle and the family's reputation. By the time we hung up, his message was crystal clear. My pain and health were secondary to protecting Kyle and the family image. Less than an hour later, my phone pinged with a text from my mother, sending a little something to help you feel better. Love you. By noon, a delivery person arrived with an elaborate gift basket containing pain relievers, a heating pad, luxury bath products, and my favorite chocolates. The card read, "Rest and recover. Family always comes first. Love, Mom and Dad." The gift felt like a bribe, a way to buy my silence. I set it aside, unable to even look at it without feeling sick. Throughout the day, the calls continued. My mother checked in hourly, each conversation circling back to keeping the incident in the family. My father called twice more, his approach becoming increasingly forceful, reminding me of family loyalty and perspective. Around 4 in the afternoon, Kyle finally called. I almost didn't answer, but a part of me wanted to hear what he had to say for himself. Hey, he said, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. Mom said I should call you. No apology, just an admission that he was calling because our mother told him to. And I prompted. And I guess things got out of hand last night, he continued reluctantly. I had a lot to drink. You broke my ribs, Kyle. Come on, I barely pushed you, he protested, instantly defensive. You probably just bruised them when you fell. I didn't fall. You shoved me into the counter. Whatever. Look, I'm calling to smooth things over, okay? Mom and Dad are freaking out that you're going to make this into some big deal. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It is a big deal. I'm seriously injured. Yeah, well, we all have bad days, he said dismissively. Remember when you crashed my car in high school? I didn't make that into a federal case. The comparison was so absurd I couldn't even formulate a response. A teenage fender bender versus a grown man violently attacking his sister? These weren't remotely comparable. Kyle, I have to go, I said finally. I have a doctor's appointment. Stephanie, don't be stupid, he snapped, his conciliatory tone vanishing. You're going to regret it if you blow this up. Was that a threat? I hung up without responding, my hands shaking with a mixture of pain, anger, and disbelief. I called my friend Melanie, one of the few people from high school I'd stayed close with. She had moved back to Oak Ridge a few years ago after getting divorced and now worked as a teacher at our old school. When I told her what happened, her reaction was everything my family's should have been. Oh my God, Steph. That's terrible. Do you want me to take you to the hospital right now? Her genuine concern brought tears to my eyes. I have an appointment with a primary care doctor this afternoon, I told her. A Dr. Hayes. She had an opening. I'm coming with you, Melanie insisted. No arguments. Text me the address and time. You don't have to do that, I protested weakly, though part of me desperately wanted the support. Yes, I absolutely do, she said firmly. And afterward, you're coming to stay with me. You shouldn't be alone right now. By the time my appointment rolled around, the pain had intensified to the point where even the prescription-strength ibuprofen wasn't touching it. Every breath was agony, and I developed a concerning shortness of breath. I knew I couldn't put this off any longer, regardless of my family's pressure. As Melanie drove me to the appointment, my phone continued to light up with calls and texts from my parents. Each message carried the same theme. Silence, discretion, family loyalty. But with each mile that took me closer to medical help, I felt a growing resolve. This wasn't right, and for once in my life, I wasn't going to prioritize my family's wishes over my own well-being. The medical office was housed in a modern building on the outskirts of Oak Ridge, far enough from the center of town that I was unlikely to run into anyone my parents knew. Melanie helped me from the car, supporting me as we slowly made our way inside. The receptionist looked concerned when she saw me wincing with each careful step. Dr. Hayes will be with you shortly, she assured me after I'd filled out the intake forms, deliberately leaving blank the section asking how the injury occurred. True to the receptionist's word, I didn't wait long. Dr. Laura Hayes turned out to be a woman in her early 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She reminded me a bit of my favorite professor from medical school. Competent, direct, but with an underlying warmth that put patients at ease. Dr. Harris, she said, extending her hand as she entered the examination room. I've heard good things about you from Dr. Patterson at the clinic. Though I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances. I tried to smile, but it came out as more of a grimace. Please call me Stephanie. And thank you for fitting me in on short notice. Of course, she nodded, glancing at my intake forms. I see you're experiencing chest pain and difficulty breathing. Can you tell me what happened? This was the moment I'd been dreading. The lifetime of conditioning to protect my family ward with my medical training and the simple human need to tell the truth. I had an accident, I said vaguely. Dr. Hayes looked at me steadily. What kind of accident? I was pushed and hit a counter, I said, the words coming out in a rush. With my back right here. I indicated the area just below my shoulder blade. She nodded, making a note in my chart. Who pushed you, Stephanie? I hesitated, then looked down at my hands. My brother. I see, she said, her voice neutral but kind. Let's take a look at the injury first, and then we can talk more about what happened, okay? The physical examination was thorough, but gentle. Dr. Hayes listened to my breathing, carefully palpated the injured area, and noted the extensive bruising that had developed. Her face remained professional, but I could see the concern in her eyes. "I'd like to get some x-rays," she said after completing the examination. "Based on your symptoms and the physical findings, I suspect you have at least 2 broken ribs, possibly 3. I'm also concerned about the shortness of breath, which could indicate a more serious complication." The X-ray confirmed her suspicions: 3 fractured ribs, one with a concerning displacement that explained my breathing difficulties. When Dr. Hayes returned to the examination room with the results, her expression was grave. "Stephanie," she said, sitting down across from me, "these are significant injuries. The displacement of your 7th rib could potentially cause a pneumothorax, a collapsed lung, if not properly monitored and treated. I'm going to prescribe appropriate pain medication and give you specific care instructions, but I need to ask you some more questions about how this happened." I nodded, a lump forming in my throat. "You said your brother pushed you," she continued gently. "Was this an accident during play, or was it deliberate?" "It was deliberate," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "He was angry. He'd been drinking." "Has anything like this happened before?" I thought about all the times Kyle had accidentally hurt me growing up. The shoves that were too hard to be playful, the arm grabs that left fingerprint bruises, the times he'd thrown things at me in anger. "Not this seriously," I said finally. "But yes, he has a history of being physical when he's angry." Dr. Hayes nodded, her expression compassionate but serious. "And how have your family members responded to this incident?" "The dam broke." Perhaps it was the pain medication beginning to take effect, or the simple relief of finally talking to someone who seemed genuinely concerned, but I found myself telling Dr. Hayes everything: Kyle's attack, my parents' dismissive response, their pressure to keep quiet, and their prioritization of the family's reputation over my well-being. "They sent me a gift basket," I said with a hollow laugh that sent pain shooting through my chest. "Like chocolates and bath bombs could make up for broken ribs, and the fact that they care more about how this affects Kyle than how it affects me." Dr. Hayes listened without interruption, occasionally making notes. When I finally fell silent, she put down her pen and looked at me directly. "Stephanie, as a medical professional, I want to be completely transparent with you about my obligations here. What you've described is a case of domestic violence, and in my position, I am a mandatory reporter." My heart sank. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means that I am legally required to report incidents of suspected abuse to the appropriate authorities," she explained gently. "In this case, that would mean filing a report with the police." Panic flared in my chest, competing with the pain from my ribs. "No, you can't do that. My family would—" I trailed off, realizing how telling my immediate response was. "Would what?" Dr. Hayes prompted softly. "Be angry? Cut you off? Continue to prioritize your brother's reputation over your safety?" Put like that, it sounded so clear-cut. But decades of family dynamics aren't easily dismissed. "You don't understand," I protested weakly. "It's complicated." "I understand better than you might think," Dr. Hayes said, surprising me. "When I was in my 20s, my father broke my arm during an argument. My mother begged me to tell the doctors I fell down the stairs, and I did, because I didn't want to tear our family apart." Her candor caught me off guard. "What happened?" 2 years later, he put my mother in the hospital with a concussion and broken jaw," she said simply. "I've spent the last 30 years wondering if I could have prevented that by speaking up the first time." Her words hit me like a physical blow. Was I enabling Kyle's behavior by staying silent? Would he escalate to hurting someone else in the future, perhaps Megan, or eventually his own children? "I understand this is difficult," Dr. Hayes continued. "Family loyalty is deeply ingrained, and the fear of consequences is real. But I want you to consider something. If one of your patients came to you with these exact injuries and this exact story, what would you advise them to do?" I knew the answer immediately. As a doctor, I would urge them to report it, to prioritize their safety, to recognize the signs of an abusive relationship. But applying that standard to myself felt impossible. What exactly would happen? I asked finally. If you report it? Dr. Hayes explained the process clearly. A report would be filed, and the police would likely want to interview me. I would have the option to press charges against Kyle, though the prosecutor could potentially proceed even without my cooperation based on the medical evidence. There would be documentation of the incident regardless. I'm not going to pretend this will be easy, she said honestly. Based on what you've told me about your family, there will likely be significant pushback. But I also want you to know that there are resources available to help you through this process. I can connect you with a victim advocate who can explain your options and support you every step of the way. I sat in silence for a long moment, weighing my options. The thought of going against my family filled me with dread. But the alternative, pretending this never happened, allowing Kyle's behavior to go unchecked, sacrificing my own well-being for the family image, suddenly seemed untenable. Okay, I said finally, my voice steadier than I expected. Do what you need to do.
Dr.
Hayes reached out and gently squeezed my hand. For what it's worth, I think you're making the right decision. Not the easy one, but the right one. She spent the next 20 minutes outlining a treatment plan for my physical injuries, explaining the warning signs I should watch for, and scheduling a follow-up appointment. Before I left, she also provided contact information for a domestic violence counselor named Jessica and a support group for family abuse survivors. One last thing, Dr. Hayes said as I was preparing to leave. Do you have a safe place to stay? I'm concerned about potential retaliation once your family learns about the report. I nodded. My friend Melanie offered to let me stay with her for a few days.
Good.
Take her up on that offer, Dr. Hayes advised. And if you ever feel unsafe or need immediate medical attention, don't hesitate to go to the emergency room or call 911. As Melanie drove me to her house afterward, I felt a strange mixture of terror and relief. I had no idea what would happen next, but for the first time in my life, I had chosen my own well-being over my family's expectations. It was terrifying, but it also felt like the first breath of truly fresh air I'd taken in years, painful though that breath was with my broken ribs. The repercussions began sooner than I expected. I had barely settled into Melanie's guest room when my phone exploded with notifications. The local police department had contacted my parents and Kyle for their side of the story, and they were livid. My father's voicemail was coldly furious. Stephanie, call me immediately. I cannot believe you would do this to your brother, to this family. We raised you better than this. My mother's message was tearful. How could you, Stephanie? After everything we've done for you? Kyle is devastated. The police came to his workplace. Do you have any idea what this could do to his career? To our standing in the community? Kyle's text was more direct. Thanks for nothing, bitch. Hope you're happy now that you've ruined everything. I turned off my phone, unable to deal with the barrage. Melanie brought me tea and sat with me while I cried, not from the physical pain, but from the emotional onslaught. How had I become the villain in this story? Why was I the one who had ruined everything, when Kyle was the one who had committed violence? They're trying to make you doubt yourself, Melanie said wisely. Don't let them. You did the right thing. The next day brought more of the same. My phone continued to fill with messages from my immediate family, and now extended family members were chiming in too. My Aunt Susan, my father's sister, called to tell me I was tearing the family apart over a little disagreement. My cousin Patrick texted that I was being dramatic and attention-seeking. Even my grandmother, who had always been kind to me, left a voicemail asking why I couldn't have handled this within the family. Only my mother's younger sister, Barbara, sent a different message. I believe you, Stephanie.
Call me if you need anything.
Love you. I hadn't spoken to Aunt Barbara in years. She'd had a falling out with my mother over something that was never explained to me, and had been largely absent from family gatherings ever since. Her support, though unexpected, was a tiny lifeline in the storm. I took a few days off from work, using my medical leave to recover physically and try to process everything emotionally. Dr. Hayes had connected me with Jessica, the domestic violence counselor who called to check on me and provide resources. She explained that what I was experiencing, the family closing ranks, the victim blaming, the pressure to recant, was unfortunately common in cases of family violence. They're trying to maintain the status quo, Jessica explained. Your speaking up threatens the family system they've established, where your brother's behavior is excused and enabled. It's painful, but their reaction actually confirms that you made the right choice by breaking the silence. 5 days after my appointment with Dr. Hayes, I returned to my apartment briefly to pick up more clothes and some work files. I had just finished packing a bag when there was a loud knock at the door. I froze, instantly knowing who it was. Sure enough, when I peered through the peephole, I saw my parents standing in the hallway, grim-faced. I considered not answering, but I knew this confrontation was inevitable. Better to have it on my territory than theirs. I opened the door, but didn't invite them in. "We need to talk," my father said without preamble. "I'm busy right now," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Too busy for your family?" my mother asked, her voice sharp with hurt and anger. "After what you've done, you owe us at least a conversation." I sighed and stepped back, allowing them to enter. They surveyed my half-packed suitcase with disapproval. "Running away?" my father asked. "Taking care of myself," I corrected. "What do you want?" "We want you to fix this mess you've created," he said bluntly. "The police are talking about charging Kyle with assault. His job could be at risk. People are already talking." "I didn't create this mess," I said, a spark of anger cutting through my anxiety. "Kyle did when he broke my ribs." "It was an accident," my mother insisted. "He pushed you, yes, but he didn't mean for you to get hurt like that." "He's 28 years old, Mom. He doesn't get to hide behind, he didn't mean it anymore. And it wasn't an accident. He deliberately shoved me because he was angry." My father stepped closer, his imposing height meant to intimidate as it had so many times in my childhood. "Stephanie, you need to tell the police you want to drop this. Say you exaggerated, that you misunderstood what happened." "I can't do that," I said, taking a step back. "It would be lying." "So, you'd rather destroy your brother's life? Over one mistake?" My mother's voice broke with emotion. "What kind of sister does that make you? What kind of brother breaks his sister's ribs and then calls her a bitch for seeking medical help?" I countered. "What kind of parents care more about their son's reputation than their daughter's safety?" My father's face darkened with anger. "That's enough. We have always protected both of you. Everything we've done has been for this family." "No," I said, the realization crystallizing as I spoke. "Everything you've done has been for the family image. For Kyle. Never for me." "That's not true," my mother protested. "We put you through medical school because it looked good to have a doctor in the family," I shot back. "Not because you cared about what I wanted. I wanted to study art, remember?" You both laughed at the idea. My father dismissed this with a wave of his hand. "This isn't about ancient history. This is about what you're doing right now, which is betraying your family." "I'm not betraying anyone. I'm standing up for myself, maybe for the first time." The argument continued in circles, with my parents alternating between guilt-tripping, threatening, and occasionally attempting to cajole me into recanting my story. When it became clear I wouldn't budge, my father played his final card. "If you go through with this, you're on your own," he said coldly. "Financially, emotionally, in every way. Is that what you want? To lose your family over this?" The threat should have terrified me. In many ways, it did. But underneath the fear was a strange sense of clarity. "I lost my family the moment you chose to protect Kyle instead of me," I said quietly. "Maybe I never really had one to begin with." My mother began to cry in earnest, while my father's face turned to stone. "You'll regret this," he said finally. "When the dust settles and you've burned all your bridges, you'll realize what you've thrown away." After they left, I sat on my couch for a long time, trembling with the aftermath of adrenaline. I had stood my ground, but the cost was becoming increasingly clear. My phone pinged with a text from Kyle. "Hope you're happy now that Mom's hysterical. Dad says you're dead to him."
Good job, sis.
The harassment didn't stop there. Over the next few days, Kyle escalated his campaign against me. He posted vague but pointed comments on social media about family traitors and attention-seeking liars. He contacted mutual friends to give them his side of the story, painting me as unstable and vindictive. Most disturbingly, he began spreading rumors at the hospital where I worked, telling people I had fabricated the abuse allegations because I was jealous of his success. Some friends distanced themselves, uncomfortable with being drawn into family drama. Colleagues gave me strange looks in the hallway. Even Melanie, supportive as she was, seemed overwhelmed by the intensity of the situation. "I had no idea your family would react like this," she admitted one evening. "I mean, I knew they were kind of intense, but this is next level." I nodded, understanding her discomfort. "You don't have to keep letting me stay here, if it's too much. I can find somewhere else." "Don't be ridiculous," she said firmly. "I'm not abandoning you. I'm just saying it's a lot, but we'll get through it." Her loyalty meant everything to me, especially as others fell away. My circle was shrinking rapidly, and the pressure was intensifying from all sides. Work became increasingly stressful as I tried to maintain my professional demeanor while dealing with the whispers and the strain of Kyle's smear campaign. The final blow came in the form of an ultimatum delivered via my father's attorney. If I didn't recant my statement to the police and the medical report within 48 hours, my parents would, 1. Cut off any remaining financial support, including the help they'd been providing with my student loan payments. 2. Remove me from the family trust. 3. Publicly disown me as their daughter. The letter concluded with a reminder that they had always been generous and would welcome me back into the family if I came to my senses and fixed the damage I had done. Reading those cold, calculating words, I felt something shift inside me. The fog of doubt and guilt that had clouded my judgment began to clear. This wasn't love. It had never been love. Real families don't threaten and manipulate and enable abuse. Real families protect each other from harm, not inflict it. I sat at Melanie's kitchen table that night, the lawyer's letter spread out before me, and made a decision. I wasn't going to recant. I wasn't going to lie. For perhaps the first time in my life, I was going to stand firmly in my truth, whatever the consequences might be. The next morning, I called Jessica, the domestic violence counselor. "I need help," I told her. "My family is escalating their pressure, and I don't know what to do next." "You're doing exactly the right thing by reaching out," she assured me. "Let's talk about some practical steps to protect yourself and build a support system that doesn't include your biological family." That conversation became the first step in my journey toward true independence, not just financially, but emotionally and psychologically as well. It was terrifying to face the future without the family I'd always known, but as I would soon discover, it was also the beginning of a profound liberation. 2 weeks after my appointment with Dr. Hayes, I returned for a follow-up. The physical healing had begun, the pain was more manageable, and my breathing had improved. But emotionally, I was still raw and vulnerable. "How are you holding up?" Dr. Hayes asked after examining my ribs and confirming they were healing properly. "Physically better," I admitted. "The rest, it's complicated." She nodded understanding. "Family trauma usually is." "Have you been in touch with Jessica?" "Yes, she's been incredibly helpful." This was an understatement. Jessica had become my lifeline, helping me navigate not just the legal aspects of my situation, but also the emotional minefield of family estrangement. She suggested I join a support group for family abuse survivors. "I went to my first meeting yesterday." "That's excellent," Dr. Hayes said approvingly. "How did it go?" "It was intense, but good. For the first time, I was in a room full of people who completely understood what I'm going through. No judgment, no questions about why I didn't just work it out with my family." Dr. Hayes smiled. "That kind of validation can be incredibly healing." I still remember my first support group meeting after my own experience. It was like finally being able to breathe after holding my breath for years. "Exactly," I agreed. One woman there, Alicia, had a similar experience with her older sister. Her parents also chose the abuser over her. Hearing her story made me feel less alone, less crazy for standing my ground. "You're definitely not crazy," Dr. Hayes assured me. What you're doing takes tremendous courage. Not many people have the strength to break generational patterns of abuse and enablement. Our conversation shifted to my physical recovery and plans for returning to work. Before I left, Dr. Hayes handed me a card. I don't normally do this with patients, but given the circumstances, I want you to have my personal cell number. If you ever need medical advice or just someone to talk to who understands, please don't hesitate to call. Her kindness brought tears to my eyes. Thank you for everything. I don't know what I would have done if I'd seen a different doctor that day. You would have found your way, she said confidently. You're stronger than you realize, Stephanie. With Jessica's guidance, I began building a support network outside my biological family. Melanie remained steadfast, offering not just her guest room but her unwavering belief in me. Alicia from the support group became a friend, our shared experiences creating an instant bond. And to my surprise, my Aunt Barbara reached out again. I've been wanting to reconnect with you for years, she told me when we met for coffee. Your mother made it difficult. After our falling out, she essentially blocked my access to you and Kyle. What was the falling out about? I asked, realizing I'd never known the real story. Barbara sighed. I confronted your father about his favoritism toward Kyle and the way they both enabled his behavior. This was after I saw Kyle push you at a family barbecue when you were about 14. You fell and scraped your hands badly, do you remember? I did remember. Kyle had been angry because I'd beaten him at a lawn game in front of his friends. My parents had laughed it off as siblings being competitive. Your mother accused me of trying to cause trouble in the family, Barbara continued. Said I was jealous because I didn't have children of my own. After that, I was gradually excluded from family events. But I always worried about you. Having Barbara back in my life was like discovering a piece of myself I hadn't known was missing. She was the family I needed, supportive, honest, protective in the ways my parents had never been. Alongside building these personal connections, I took practical steps to secure my independence. I changed the locks on my apartment, installed a security system, and set up cameras at the entrance. I consulted with a lawyer about the implications of being removed from the family trust and cut off financially. I opened new bank accounts at a different bank than the one my family used. Small steps, but each one made me feel more secure, more in control of my own life. Jessica also connected me with resources to help understand the psychological patterns that had shaped my family dynamic. I devoured books on toxic family systems, narcissistic parents, and the psychology of scapegoating. The more I learned, the clearer my situation became. Kyle was the golden child, perpetually excused and elevated no matter his behavior. I was the scapegoat, expected to absorb blame and prioritize everyone else's needs above my own. This education was both painful and liberating. Painful to recognize how deeply dysfunctional my family was, but liberating to understand that it wasn't my fault. I hadn't caused the abuse by being too sensitive or difficult as my parents had always implied. I hadn't imagined or exaggerated the mistreatment. It was real, and I had every right to protect myself from it. The most challenging aspect of this new knowledge was learning to set and maintain boundaries. My entire life had been built around accommodating my family's demands and expectations. Standing firm in the face of their pressure went against decades of conditioning. Think of boundary setting as a muscle, Jessica advised during one of our sessions. It's weak at first because you've never been allowed to use it. But each time you hold your ground, it gets stronger. I practice small acts of boundary setting daily. Not answering every call or text from my parents immediately. Refusing to engage when they tried to guilt or manipulate me. Correcting misinformation when mutual acquaintances repeated Kyle's version of events. Each tiny act of self-advocacy built my confidence for the bigger confrontations. The police investigation into the incident continued, with a prosecutor ultimately deciding to charge Kyle with domestic assault despite my parents' efforts to intervene. Kyle hired an expensive attorney and pleaded not guilty, setting the stage for a potential trial where I would have to testify against him. The prospect was terrifying, but I was determined to see it through. Through all of this, I was surprised to discover an unexpected sense of peace emerging alongside the turmoil. For so long, I had contorted myself to fit into my family's expectations, suppressing my own needs and perceptions to maintain harmony. Now, despite the external chaos, I was beginning to feel an internal alignment I'd never experienced before. My thoughts, feelings, and actions were finally in congruence. I was living in my truth, painful though it was. My support group became a sanctuary where I could express my fears and doubts without judgment. During one particularly difficult session after receiving a scathing email from my father, I broke down. Sometimes I wonder if it would have been easier to just stay silent, I admitted through tears. To just take the pain and keep the peace like I always have. Easier in the short term, maybe, Alicia said gently. But that kind of silence eats away at your soul. Trust me, I tried it for years. An older woman named Ruth nodded in agreement. I stayed silent about my brother's abuse for 40 years. By the time I finally spoke up, I'd lost myself so completely, I didn't know who I was anymore. You're doing the hard work now, but you're saving yourself decades of invisible pain. Their words stayed with me, a talisman against the doubt that still sometimes crept in during weak moments. I was doing the hard work now. I was breaking a cycle that could have continued for generations. I was choosing truth over comfortable lies, health over dysfunction, reality over illusion. 6 weeks after the incident, I felt strong enough to return to my own apartment full-time. Melanie helped me sage the space, a ritual cleansing she swore by, and we rearranged the furniture to create a fresh start. My parents' gift basket had long since been donated to a women's shelter, removing that symbol of their manipulative support. That night, alone in my own space for the first time since everything had happened, I took out my watercolors, in use since college, and began to paint. The image that emerged wasn't planned, a small bird with a broken wing, but surrounded by light, beginning to heal. As I lost myself in the creative process that had once been my passion, I felt something shifting, opening, releasing within me. I was not just surviving this ordeal. In some profound way, I was being transformed by it. 6 months passed, bringing changes I could never have anticipated when I first sat in Dr. Hayes' examination room with broken ribs and a broken heart. The physical healing was complete. My ribs had mended without complications, leaving only the faintest ache during changes in weather to remind me of the injury. The emotional healing was an ongoing process, but one marked by remarkable progress. I had moved to a different neighborhood, a small but significant act of reclaiming my independence. My new apartment was brighter, with large windows that flooded the space with natural light and a spare bedroom I'd converted into an art studio. Paintings in various stages of completion lined the walls, evidence of my rekindled passion for creating. Throughout these months, my family situation had evolved in painful but necessary ways. After multiple attempts at reconciliation on their terms, which always involved me recanting my exaggerated version of events and apologizing to Kyle, I had requested a meeting with clear conditions. It would take place on neutral ground, with a family counselor present, and with the understanding that I would not be gaslit or pressured to change my story. Surprisingly, they agreed. Perhaps they thought they could still convince me in person, or maybe they were feeling the social consequences of our estrangement in a community where appearances mattered so much. The meeting took place at the counselor's office on a crisp fall afternoon. My parents arrived dressed immaculately, as if for church, their expressions a careful blend of concern and restraint. Kyle came separately, his usual confidence dimmed somewhat by the pending legal case against him, which had been delayed by procedural issues. The counselor, Dr. Morgan, established ground rules for our conversation. No interrupting, no name-calling, using I statements rather than accusations. My parents nodded agreeably, though I could sense their impatience with what they probably viewed as unnecessary formality. Stephanie, Dr. Morgan began, would you like to start by sharing what you hope to achieve from today's meeting? I took a deep breath, centering myself as I'd practiced. I want clarity and honesty about what happened and what happens next. I want acknowledgement of the harm that was done to me, both by Kyle's actions and by your response to them. And I want to establish boundaries for any future relationship we might have. My mother frowned slightly at the word boundaries, but remained silent. My father shifted in his seat, already uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. Thomas and Natalie, Dr. Morgan turned to my parents. What are your hopes for today? My father cleared his throat. We want our family back together. This division has gone on long enough. We want to put this unfortunate incident behind us and move forward. It wasn't an unfortunate incident, I said quietly but firmly. It was assault. Kyle broke 3 of my ribs and then called me a bitch when I sought medical help. You both pressured me to lie about my injuries and prioritized his reputation over my physical safety. Stephanie, you know that's not how it happened, my mother began, her voice taking on the placating tone I'd grown to recognize as the prelude to gaslighting. Actually, Mom, that is exactly how it happened, I countered. And this pattern of denying reality is precisely why we're sitting here today. Dr. Morgan gently redirected the conversation, asking each of us to express our feelings without disputing each other's experiences. What followed was 2 hours of painful but necessary truth-telling. My parents continued to minimize and deflect, though with less conviction than before. Kyle offered a superficial apology that focused more on the inconvenience the situation had caused him than on the harm he had inflicted. I'm sorry things got out of hand, he said, not quite meeting my eyes. I never meant for you to get seriously hurt. But you have to admit, going to the police was an extreme reaction. Was it? I asked, maintaining my composure despite the anger bubbling beneath the surface. If a stranger had broken my ribs, would reporting it be extreme? Why should you be held to a lower standard of behavior because we're related? He had no good answer for that. By the end of the session, it was clear that while my family was willing to have me back in their lives, they were not truly willing to acknowledge the dysfunction that had led to our estrangement. They wanted reconciliation without accountability, forgiveness without change. As we prepared to leave, my father made one final appeal. Stephanie, we miss you. Despite everything, we're still your family. No one will ever love you like we do. I looked at him for a long moment, seeing him clearly perhaps for the first time. That's the problem, Dad. The way you love is conditional and harmful. I deserve better. We all do. Walking out of that office, I felt an unexpected lightness. I had faced my greatest fear, permanent estrangement from my family, and discovered it wasn't as terrifying as I had imagined. In fact, the prospect of continuing to accept their version of love now seemed far more frightening than building a life without them. In the months that followed, I maintained minimal contact with my parents through occasional texts and brief phone calls, always with strict boundaries in place. Kyle and I had no direct communication outside of necessary legal interactions. His case eventually ended in a plea deal, a misdemeanor charge with probation and mandatory anger management classes. It was less than he deserved, but more accountability than he'd ever faced before. Professionally, my life took unexpected turns. The courage I'd found in standing up to my family translated into greater confidence at work. I advocated more effectively for my patients, particularly those showing signs of abuse or neglect. My colleagues noticed the change, and I was offered a leadership position on a new community health initiative focused on domestic violence prevention and intervention. This work brought me into regular contact with Dr. Hayes, who became both mentor and friend. During one of our meetings to discuss the initiative, I finally found the words to express my gratitude. I wrote you a letter, I said, handing her an envelope, to thank you for what you did that day, for seeing what was happening and having the courage to do something about it. She accepted the letter with a warm smile. I was just doing my job, Stephanie. No, I shook my head. You did more than that. You showed me what true professional integrity looks like. You were willing to make a difficult choice because it was the right one, not the easy one. That's the kind of doctor I want to be. Our work together on the initiative became one of the most rewarding aspects of my professional life. We developed training programs for medical professionals to better recognize and respond to signs of abuse, created resources for patients, and built partnerships with local support services. Each person we helped felt like a small redemption of my own experience. My personal life flourished as well. The support group that had been my lifeline in the early days became a community where I both received and offered healing. Alicia and I started a monthly gathering for survivors to share art, poetry, and stories as part of their recovery process. Melanie remained my closest friend, her loyalty during my darkest days, cementing a bond that felt more like family than many blood relationships. And speaking of family, Aunt Barbara became a central figure in my life. Her home became my holiday destination, her wisdom a guide through the complex emotions of creating a new kind of family when the original one had failed. Through her, I connected with cousins I'd barely known growing up, discovering relationships untainted by the dynamics that had poisoned my immediate family. Most surprisingly, I began dating again after years of focusing exclusively on my career. Daniel, a kind and thoughtful architect I met through a community art class, showed me what healthy communication and respect looked like in a romantic relationship. Our connection developed slowly, built on friendship and mutual values rather than the desperate need for approval that had characterized my previous relationships. On the anniversary of my appointment with Dr. Hayes, I took myself on a solo retreat to a cabin by a lake. I brought my paints, journal, and a stack of books, intending to reflect on the year's journey. Sitting on the dock at sunset, watching the light play across the water, I wrote in my journal, "A year ago today, I was broken in more ways than I knew. My ribs were fractured, but so was my sense of self, my understanding of love, my belief in my own perceptions. I thought speaking the truth would destroy me, that I couldn't survive without the family that had both shaped and distorted me. I was wrong. The truth didn't destroy me. It rebuilt me, stronger than before. I learned that real love doesn't demand silence about abuse. Real family, whether bound by blood or by choice, lifts you up rather than holding you down. Real strength isn't enduring mistreatment. It's having the courage to say no more." I don't know what the future holds. The relationship with my parents remains complicated and limited. Kyle and I may never reconcile. There are still days of grief and doubt. But for the first time in my life, I'm building a foundation based on truth rather than pretense, on authentic connection rather than obligation, on self-respect rather than self-sacrifice. That feels like victory. That feels like healing. That feels like home. As I sit here writing this, I wonder how many of you have faced similar crossroads in your own families. Have you ever had to choose between peace and truth? Between family loyalty and self-preservation? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If my experience has helped even one person feel less alone or more empowered to seek help, then sharing it has been worthwhile. Please like this video if it resonated with you, subscribe for more stories of healing and transformation, and share it with someone who might need to hear that they deserve better. Remember, sometimes the family we create is more healing than the one we were born into. Thank you for listening, and may you find the strength to honor your truth, whatever it may be.